Hi, welcome and thanks for joining me in this video. I hope that this video is going to give some people some insight into what I have been pondering about quite a bit is how do you replicate in-class tests where you would be giving basically tests given out in printed format. Students would sit down in a classroom or a lecture hall and write the actual test and then submit it back in. The test would be given for X amount of time, depending if there were quizzes, tests, or exams, or whatever it may be. But the beauty was that you could gather quite a lot of students in a classroom and print off these tests, and then students would be able to do them. Now, in an online environment, you can't do that, right? If students are all over the place in their homes, coffee shops, or whatever they're writing or whatever they're doing, it's not like you can gather them up and then see exactly what's happening. So my ultimate goal is to trying to ponder and think, how do I replicate these in-class tests in an online environment? And I hope that this gives you some ideas. And I really truly hope, if you are a teacher, professor, instructor, you share it with others and maybe people can start adding up comments. I'll go through those comments and maybe create a future video on the ideas that have come up, and maybe as kind of an inclusive world platform that we have where everybody can watch, maybe we can come up with some neat ideas on how to replicate these in-class tests. So my idea is not super innovative in a sense, but it does allow any teacher or prof to be able to give out tests or exams or quizzes in kind of the old school way, even though it might be an online environment. Now, one of the things, of course, is that a lot of people will or have been doing is, they might have cameras on students. They call it sometimes a lockdown screen, where everything gets locked down and they're on an actual camera and they're writing their test and then they submit it. Now, what if that is not possible? You do run into more and more probability of problems if you have more and more students, because the technical aspect cameras may give out, even if you have microphones sometimes. Students don't always have an environment full out where they want to disclose the cameras. It may not make them feel comfortable, or it may just not be feasible in some sense. Now, so if you don't want to do that, what can you do? You're looking on the screen and there's a test right now, okay, that you're looking, or at least a copy of one. And, how do students actually finish this particular test and then submit it in? What do you do if you don't have just one or two students, or you can make one or two versions, but you have, 20, 30, 40, in cases of universities, maybe you have hundreds of students. How do you get them to do these particular tests? So my idea behind this is that I still would want to replicate this because I find value in this type of testing. Now, if you don't put cameras on, of course, students can have their notes, or basically it's an open book test. And, and that's fine. And I think that's kind of where the world has to be heading. Remember that even if you're working, even if you're a teacher or a prof, you yourself are looking things up. So I'm smiling at you because I know that we all do it. We don't remember every single thing. So we're constantly kind of researching back, and sometimes we ourselves forget the material that we've been teaching for quite a while. And in that case, I'm actually comfortable with students sometimes having open book tests. Now, if they're not allowed to use certain things, one of the things that you could do is you can literally create, sometimes I call it an integrity statement, where students literally sign it off, and then attach it or make it kind of like a title page to their test that they would be writing. I didn't use these and these resources, I didn't actually communicate with anybody, and then they put a signature on those statements, and you can kind of design those statements on your own, whatever it is that you may wish. Maybe they can't use a calculator or something like that, and you can make them sign those particular statements, and then they would be in front. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they will or will not. And this brings the point of that I think it's vital that students have to actually show their work, right? So they have to actually write out solutions so that you can see what is happening. And the other problem, of course, is that students may communicate between each other. So if you have one copy of a test, that might be fine in an in-class environment where they're all sitting, far enough from each other that it's not a worry. Sometimes you can make two versions, so if they're sitting closer, they just basically have different tests, or you can just vary the questions randomly. So I think the ultimate problem is, how do we create these tests? And unfortunately, I haven't been able to come up with a better solution than, you do need multiple versions. And you need, quite a few versions depending on how many students you have, so that the probability will be that students won't have the same particular tests. Now, the worry that you may have may not be as big of a worry, because if you're writing an online test, but it is timed. So let's imagine that all students are supposed to be receiving this test, let's say at 10 a.m., and the test is supposed to finish at 11 a.m. So everybody writes exactly at the same time. Now, if you create multiple versions of a test, if you have 4, 5, 6 versions, so as you know, and you randomly give them out to students, or in some strategic way, okay, however you would want to do that. Maybe students are not doing that well, they'll get a particular version. Students are doing very well, they'll get a different versions. I think randomly is probably best. Then the more versions you have, the probability of them receiving those kind of goes down, right? So you can even randomize the questions in a sense, so they can be computerized in some way where they are actually, instead of writing it on a paper and seeing those questions, you might set it up in whatever platform you're using, and question 1 would be randomized from a pool of questions, where you have 5 of them or 6 or 7, and then question 2 would be randomized from another pool, and so on. Now this reduces the probability of them actually having the exact same test, quite a bit. Now, when you do these multiple versions, which I don't think you can get away from, so you will have to do that. And if you have a better way, with less versions, put it down in the comments. I'm very curious what you might think. When you have these multiple versions, so what happens? So my kind of strategy is that I would think that, you can send out these tests at random points, right? So to random students. So let's imagine we have 5 or 6 versions, randomly, sent out to students. We allocate a particular time where everybody writes exactly at the same time and everybody submits exactly at the same time. Now, once that happens, all these submissions that you have, now if they're writing, so let's say the one on the screen, if they would finish this test, how do they submit that to you? If they are writing it off and you sent them to the student, well, they can print the test off and they can literally write it as they would in a classroom on a printed form. And then what they can do is they can scan the actual full test. Now, how do they scan it into one file so that it's convenient for you to go over instead of receiving multiple pictures? I'm going to put up a link because I've done a video on how you can do that for free. And it's pretty relatively easy to do. And students won't have an issue with that. So you can create, one thing. Now, if students don't have printers, you can, of course, just tell them to do it on a blank pieces of paper and then label the questions along, tell you which version they had, and then, scan them all in one file and then submit it. Now, the submission can be either sent to you through email or maybe in a platform you have a depository where you can just have students submit them in, by attaching a file in some way. So that's kind of my idea of running in-class tests in an online environment. And, to kind of summarize that idea is, one of the things that I believe, you would most likely have to do is you definitely have to schedule a time frame to do that. So you would have to have a particular time where everybody writes it exactly at the same time. You would have multiple versions of the tests so that if any communication between students happens, it's very difficult if you have more versions that you run into students doing exactly the same test. You would have to take those particular tests and as students write them, they would have to submit it to you in one file so it's convenient enough, okay, for you to mark it or for the TAs to mark it or whoever is marking it, and then send it back to you. Okay, so that's something that you would need. And I believe that if you do this, you can quite closely replicate that in-class test. Now, there are many other obviously ideas for tests in general. So instead of doing tests, well, why not let's just give them assignments or give them projects or give them case studies or something else. I do value all of those, but my idea is like, if I wanted to really replicate an in-class test, what is the closest thing I could come? And I believe that this is probably the closest idea to replicating those in-class tests in some way. So let me know what you think. Let me know what the problems might come up that maybe I haven't thought of. I know that there's always some technical issues in terms of submissions that students can have. But anything else, I'm kind of open ears. I'm curious what you as teachers, profs, and instructors think in terms of trying to do something like that. All right. Thank you for watching. This is honestly just a call to the world of all the teachers and profs and instructors so that maybe we can come together on this idea and figure out how to make this thing work. All right. And how to come as close as possible to replicating in-class tests. All right. Cheers, everybody. Bye.